9:37 the time. Need to know what Jeff Angelo is the program. Remember when Democratic candidates were coming through Iowa vying for your support for the presidential nomination, and they started talking about the Green New Deal, the Green New Deal, the Green New Deal. That was a big thing for a while, right? And then they realized rural America, like Iowans, hated it because it's a real threat to rural America. The regulations that you are proposing under the Green New Deal are a threat to rural America. So they just stopped putting a title on it. They still favor everything that's in it. The Biden administration is still trying to implement it, and it has real economic implications for agriculture in small towns. Sarah Montalbano has a column at the website realclearenergy.org that caught my attention. The headline is Biden's environmental virtue signaling helps no one. And Sarah is a research associate at Alaska Policy Forum. So a lot of this article deals with environmental virtue signaling in Alaska, but I couldn't help but apply it to rural America in general. Sarah with me on the Davison Family Dentistry Newsmaker line. Sarah, thanks very much for joining me. Good morning.
Good morning. How are you?
I am doing terrific, Sarah. So can we talk about this? I'll go big picture with you as far as how environmentalism is causing rural communities to suffer. But you do start with just talking about what's going on in Alaska, and then we go big picture with how we extend that out to basically rural communities. So talk to me about what your concerns are in Alaska.
Sure. Alaska is a state that is constantly treated by the left in general as an environmental wildlife preserve. I think there's no easy way to say that, but it's really true. Alaska's major industries are oil and gas, fishing and tourism are the other big ones. And oil and gas is, quite frankly, under attack in the state. The Biden administration, in my article for Real Clear Energy, that was actually the first of what Biden had promised. He'd promised to review the roadless rule in the Tongass National Forest to say, look, we don't want roads or development in this national forest, as well as within hours of his inauguration, he had suspended oil and gas leases in the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge. So the administration is really following through on its promises towards Alaska, and none of those are good for the state's economy. Well,
and the other thing, Sarah, that drew me to your article is the term virtue signaling, because I've been talking about that in the show about how much politics these days has become about just making people feel good about themselves, and then they are hit with the practical reality of what their policies actually mean. And I've been giving examples, sanctuary cities. It was great when you were New York City and you were going to become a sanctuary city and welcome immigrants no matter what their status was, and it made you feel good. You had no idea that the implication of that policy would be you would have to declare a state of emergency. You have no room. Your social services are being overrun. That's where practical reality actually hits your ideology. So the virtue signaling in Alaska, Sarah, what's the result of that?
The result of it, frankly, is that it doesn't help the people that it's intended to help. And using the Tongass National Forest as an example, there are 70,000 people that live in and around that forest, and it's home to a struggling logging industry. They only have, about less than 400 jobs actually in 2020, down from 4,000 at its real height in 1990. So we need to have economic opportunity in these regions, and the fact of the matter is that, these regulations that the Biden administration is putting out are not actually helping the people it's meant to, and it doesn't do all that much for the environment anyway. I want to say that the Tongass rule would have opened up maybe another, 100 miles of road in the next 100 years. Like, that's not a lot in the grand scope of this forest. So it really is, scoring points on all you're trying to do is score points with environmentalists. It doesn't help anyone. It doesn't help the environment.
And so, of course, Sarah, every day on shows like this one, we're talking about economic growth just in general in rural Iowa and policies that can help it. And sometimes we don't focus enough on policies that are actually hurting it right now, because so many people are working hard to develop rural America again. This is the kind of thing that is, in fact, impacting growth or degrowth, if you will, in rural America, isn't it?
Absolutely. And one of the things we noticed in Alaska, we couldn't help but notice, is that, the state can't survive on tourism and fishing alone. We saw in the pandemic what happened when the cruise ships couldn't come up to Alaska, when we were just, really decimated by that reliance on tourism. And so it's really a concern, and it makes the states harder to live in. Alaska is facing net outmigration. Over the past 10 years, every year, more people have left the state than entered it. Mm-hmm. And there's just not all of the opportunities that we want for our young people to keep them there. So I really think this is a matter of, economic prosperity, too, as well as, balancing development and conservation of the environment.
The other thing that I take away from your article, Sarah, again, the article on realclearenergy.org, Biden's environmental virtue signaling helps no one, is the people just seem to be powerless against this at this point. Like, is there any way of pushing back? Is there any way of rolling back? Are there any victories being won against this virtue signaling?
That's an excellent question. I think one of the victories that Alaska in particular has seen is the Willow Oil project actually got approved, which is kind of astounding. But this project only got 3 of its 5 drilling pads. It wasn't able to get, as much as they wanted, and there were a whole bunch of trade-offs. Whatever the federal government does has strings attached. And so that's a lot of what we're seeing, is just that it's very difficult to do this. The second part is that, all of these decisions, a lot of them are being made by either unaccountable bureaucrats in D.C., or they're being made by environmental activists who are using the litigation process to slow things down and make uncertainty for investors. Why would you want to invest in someplace when that project might not come to fruition for another 10 years? So I think that's a really important thing for us to think about, is how can we streamline the permitting process and make litigation less disruptive? And how can we empower the states who are actually affected by these things to make their own decisions about energy and the environment?
In her article, Sarah quotes Teddy Roosevelt, and it's just a great paragraph in her article about environmental decisions and what the original purpose of the Forest Service was. Teddy saying the primary object of the forest policy is the making of prosperous homes. Every other consideration comes as secondary. And that's not the primary consideration at this point, Sarah, is it? I mean, that was the president who was saying we're going to do this stuff, but prosperity is our goal. That's not the goal here anymore.
Absolutely, it's not. And I wanted to close this article with that, to remind us that this is what conservation is for. When we are conserving the environment, it is so that people are able to live better lives and have these economic opportunities and still preserve their environment for, future generations to enjoy. And I think we've seen the kind of morphing of environmentalism to become, a zero-sum game where, the optimal level of development is 0, because we're harming this pristine Mother Earth that protects us and, loves us and all of these things. But that's not what happens. The Earth is dangerous, and we need to be able to actually support ourselves and humanity in it. So that's why I love that quote, is just that it is for the making of prosperous homes, and every other consideration is secondary.
Yeah. And that is not the goal these days. And I'm sure I love bringing Sarah's views to an Iowa audience. And I am asking her to be specific about Alaska. But you hear what I'm saying. You hear what Sarah's throwing down. The article is titled Biden's Environmental Virtue Signaling Helps No One. And it is on realclearenergy.org. Sarah, very insightful today. Thanks very much. 9:40.